So the W that I will be focusing on is when, and the question that I will pose is, how does the time period that Hamlet was written in influence the dynamic of the play? So basically, um, Hamlet was written by Shakespeare in the 16th century, like right at the beginning of the 16th century, and every aspect of the play was basically influenced by the time that it was written in, hence the 16th century Renaissance. The first thing that I want to talk about is the wardrobe that the women wear. In the 16th century, there was a rich and there was a poor, and women in the poor society could only afford wool or linen clothes versus women in like the rich households could like they wore silk or cotton, which was like the more expensive material. And in the play, that's what we see Ophelia and the queen wear most often. A clear example of this is the scene in one of the versions, the scene that we saw where Claudius was telling Hamlet that mourning's okay, but too much mourning is not good. We see the queen wear this beautiful blue silk long dress, and that's very very normal for somebody in like the wealthy family in the 16th century to have worn. However, the rest of the people like could not afford that. So for the queen to wear that, it was it's evident. It's a reflection of the society in the 16th century. Um, Furthermore, um, the advice that Ophelia gets from Laertes and Polonius. Now Ophelia, we know that Ophelia has a relationship with Hamlet in the play. However, when Laertes has a conversation with Ophelia, he kind of warns her to like look out for Hamlet and like to kind of be careful with him. And while Ophelia does kind of see it as like a hypocritical advice coming from Laertes, it is kind of seen as appropriate, but nobody really talks about the nature of the advice kind of being inappropriate, because Laertes does say that Hamlet is like too old to love her honorably. And I think in today's society, if a woman with a relationship with another man was given that advice from like a family member, it would kind of like have a little hint of like the woman would kind of understand that the person giving her advice is kind of in no place to like say anything about her relationship, because she's her own person and that she can be with whoever she wants to. However, in the time that Hamlet was written in, this was kind of seen as like somebody genuinely looking out for you and like an honorable kind of advice that you're kind of supposed to, take in and understand. And this is immediately proven by when Polonius asks Ophelia to explain what Laertes told her. He instantly agreed with Laertes and like banned Ophelia from ever seeing Hamlet again. Or like he more so like told her that she can't pursue her love for him, rather than kind of looking at it as who's this guy giving my daughter advice on love. Because in the 16th century, it was very, very normal. Another thing that is very evident in the play is it is very, very, very male-driven. Thus far, we don't see a single female character kind of leading the way or, leading her own journey. All the women characters are kind of just going with the flow of all the male characters that are either the main characters or the leading characters that are kind of making the moves. We see Ophelia kind of just follow Hamlet and cry over him, and we see the queen kind of just follow Claudius's path. And this is actually, again, very, very evident in this same scene that Claudius was telling Hamlet to not mourn that much. We see the queen like making all these expressions. We see her, thinking, having all these like jumbled thoughts, but as soon as Claudius would turn to her, like she would just act like everything's fine, because women are kind of, they just go with whatever is going on, whatever the male characters are doing. And that in the 16th century, of course, is like super, super normal, because it was a super, super patriarchal society that like women lived in, with barely any rights or anything. Um, and lastly, religion. Religion is a huge part of the play. Like we see, Hamlet's biggest debate, to be or not to be. He wants to die, but it's the fear of God. And we can relate it back to how society was in the 16th century, where, it was really difficult to pinpoint what was right and wrong and who was guilty and innocent in the 16th century. So people kind of just relied on religion to make that decision for them, going back to when they didn't have court systems, and two people in a conflict were set to fight, and whoever won was because God saved them because they weren't guilty, and whoever died, they died because God didn't save them since they were guilty. So that's why religion is so such an important part in Hamlet, because in that time era, religion was all people had, and I think because of the little knowledge that people had to make inferences on what is right from wrong, it also led people to believe in superstitions and witches and supernatural things, which again we see implemented in the play through Hamlet's father's ghost, who is giving Hamlet all these clues on who killed him and stuff like that. So the play fundamentally demonstrates the challenges of knowing the truth in this time period. So all in all, the 16th century Renaissance influenced Shakespeare's writing in every single way, which is why the characters wear what they wear, they behave the way they do, and they believe in what they believe in. So it all comes from the world that Shakespeare lived in and what the world was like in the 16th century, for the storyline to kind of move the way that it does.